To that question, and I say this as someone who wants to look at the math across the board on both tax policy and spending policy and how to achieve deficit neutrality/reduction, that the question there requires modeling, right? It requires modeling based on the assumptions of the policies that would create growth, right? So when one says, had the TICJA policies not been put in place, whether it was the permanent provisions within the corporate code that reduced the rate on the corporate rates, or whether it was the TICJA provisions that are expiring, is it fair to say that you have to factor in, right, reverse engineering that to say, well, what would the revenue have been? Well, you have to make assumptions of what the growth would have been, right? When you have fewer dollars in the pockets of the American people. Is that a accurate description?
Absolutely. It is absolutely the case that the size of the economy and the economic performance has a large impact on the ability of the Treasury to collect money.
And so that's not a static analysis. In other words, like you've got to, it's dynamic in the sense of like when you assume that you don't have that tax policy in place, you got to go back and reverse engineer what would the economy have done. You can't just do simple math and apply the rates to the economy that was created after you then put in place the policies that created the economy, right?
Yes, sir.
And I think it's important. Well, let me ask you this: is on those questions with respect to the tax policy and what creates growth and what doesn't create growth, is it important to view that in the aggregate? In other words, you sit here and you try to move the levers on one tax policy versus another. The gentleman mentioned the child tax credits. We might have agreement or disagreement across the aisle on whether that's a good policy or bad policy for family reasons, like supporting families with children, putting more money in the pockets of families with certain income levels. Point is, maybe there's agreement or disagreement on the policy, but that would have a certain kind of economic impact. Corporate rates would have a certain kind of economic impact. Research and development, expensing, those have different kinds of economic impact. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. The different tax provisions would have different economic impacts.
And it is not important to look at the aggregate of the policies and make a determination on the assumptions of economic growth based on all of that in terms of the amount of money that is sitting in the hands of the American people as opposed to the government for that economic growth.
Yes, sir.